Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, when you look at the global headlines, it can feel like you're getting hit with all these high-stakes, disconnected stories. But when we stack up the sources, a really surprising pattern starts to emerge.
It does. You see how the world's most intense conflicts are weaving these unexpected threads. Financial, political, human, across every continent.
And that's really our mission today, to synthesize these huge, sprawling stories.
Exactly. We're going from the trenches in Ukraine to alleged mercenary recruitment schemes in South Africa. We're analyzing this huge diplomatic fight over Russian assets in Europe.
And then tracking this extraordinary case of political accountability down in Brazil.
Right. We are connecting the dots between global war, local politics, finance, and, the very future of democratic stability.
What really jumps out is how conflict management has become this globally disruptive thing. It's not just about what happens on the battlefield anymore.
No. Whether it's financial sanctions or recruitment drives, the consequences of the Ukraine war are absolutely not confined to Eastern Europe. You need that wider context to really get what's happening.
So let's start with maybe one of the most concerning impacts of that global reach. We're going thousands of miles south to South Africa, and a really shocking story about deceptive recruitment.
Okay, let's do it, because it's an incredible family drama layered on top of what looks like international trafficking.
The sources are all centered on a police report filed by Nkosazana Zuma Minkube. Now, she's the daughter of the former South African president, Jacob Zuma.
Right.
And she's alleging that her own sister, Deduzio Zuma Sambudla, who's also a politician, recruited 17 men, along with 2 other people. 8 of these men were family members.
And the lure, the promise, was paramilitary training in Russia. They were told they were going to a training course. For young men looking for opportunity, that must have sounded like an incredible chance.
But the reality, at least according to this police report, was just horrific. They were allegedly handed over to a Russian mercenary group.
And sent to fight in Ukraine.
Directly. Without their knowledge, without their consent. They were apparently forced to sign contracts written in Russian, a language none of them understood.
And this is more than just some isolated tragic incident. This feeds into a very concerning global pattern we're seeing.
Okay.
There's increasing evidence that Russia is relying on systemic coercion, even outright deception, to get foreign fighters.
Yeah.
We've seen similar reports coming out of India, Nepal, Syria, Cuba, even Kenya.
Wow.
These men are often targeted on social media with these false promises, high-paying jobs in construction or logistics, only to end up on the front line.
And the political side of this in South Africa is so messy. Deduzio Zuma Sangudla is a prominent MP for the MK party, and she's already in legal trouble for allegedly inciting violence during the 2021 riots.
And now she's filed countercharges, right? Claiming she was also duped.
She has, yes. But regardless of the truth behind the family drama, the South African government seems to be taking it very seriously.
President Ramaphosa's office confirmed they're investigating the fate of these 17 men. They're trying to bring them home from the Donbas region. And they're being very clear. It is illegal for South Africans to fight for a foreign military without government authorization.
Okay, so that brings us from the human cost of the conflict to the diplomatic battlefield. High-stakes maneuvers are definitely underway for a potential end to the war.
Precisely. We're seeing talks accelerate around a major U.S.-Ukraine peace plan. Ukrainian President Zelensky is pushing really hard to meet with Donald Trump, maybe even before the end of the month, to finalize a joint framework.
And Ukraine's head of the presidential office, Andriy Yermak, he's confirmed they have an understanding with U.S. officials on most of the new draft deal.
Which is significant. It suggests a level of pre-negotiation that goes way beyond just, public statements.
So what's the sticking point?
Well, what's fascinating here is the main point of friction is still territorial concessions. Zelensky is insisting he has to personally discuss these sensitive points with Trump.
And this is critical because that first plan, the 28-point proposal that got so much criticism, required Ukraine to give up additional territories.
Exactly. Beyond what Russia already occupies. And that was just a complete non-starter for Kyiv.
So if this new plan has any language about giving up sovereign territory, wouldn't that just collapse the whole thing immediately? Why even push a plan with such a clear red line?
It suggests the goal might be to establish a framework for de-escalation that the U.S. can then sell to Russia. Maybe prioritizing a ceasefire over absolute territorial integrity, at least in the short term.
And the carrot they're offering is robust security guarantees.
That's the counterweight. Yermak highlighted these planned, legally binding security guarantees from the U.S. and European allies. He called it a historic decision. That's the trade-off they're hoping to make.
But Russia's not just sitting by quietly, are they? What's their take on these changing drafts?
No. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov issued a pretty stern warning. Moscow is apparently okay with the original U.S. framework, but he's cautioning that the situation would be fundamentally different if this new version strays too far from what was supposedly discussed between Trump and Putin.
So they're basically saying their approval is conditional.
Very conditional. It feels like the whole thing is sitting on a razor's edge, dependent on U.S. politics and this very fragile Russian goodwill. And that skepticism is being mirrored in Europe.
Right. French President Macron said there's no Russian will for a ceasefire, and there's still a long way to go.
From conditional peace plans to cold, hard cash. Because the diplomacy is inseparable from this massive financial fight over Russia's immobilized funds.
And this is where you can really see the fractures within the Western alliance starting to show.
Oh, absolutely. The numbers are staggering. We're talking about almost 300 billion euros in Russian sovereign assets that were frozen, and the vast majority, about 180 billion of it, is held in Europe, mostly in Belgium's Euroclear.
Okay, and the specific proposal that's reportedly coming from the Trump camp has caused an absolute uproar among European leaders. Can you lay out specifics of that plan for us?
So the proposal, as it's been reported, is, well, it's aggressive. It calls for $100 billion, that's about 86 billion euros, of those frozen European assets to be invested in U.S.-led efforts to rebuild and invest in Ukraine.
Okay, so that's problem number one, using assets held in Europe to fund U.S.-led ventures.
Right. But the kicker is the next part. Europe would then be expected to match that $100 billion.
But not from the Russian assets.
No. That money would come directly from European taxpayers' pockets.
Wow.
And the final piece is maybe the most audacious. The remaining 200 billion euros plus would be put into a joint U.S.-Russian investment vehicle.
A joint U.S.-Russian vehicle.
Yes. And experts note this vehicle would be structured to benefit U.S. companies, the U.S. government, and even Russia itself. Essentially, the U.S. wants to manage, direct, and profit from the majority of the assets that are frozen in Europe.
Unsurprisingly, this has been met with just fierce opposition in Europe. German Chancellor Merz, French President Macron, they are vehemently against this.
They are. They're stressing that assets held under European law cannot just be handed over to American interests. Merz famously called the whole idea unthinkable.
So we need to clarify a key legal point here for you. The European counterproposal is different.
Very different. The plan from Germany, France, and the UK is to keep the Russian money frozen indefinitely. This avoids outright confiscation of the principal amount, which is legally very tricky. Instead, they want to use the assets as long-term leverage until Russia agrees to pay reparations.
So if I'm getting this right, the core conflict isn't whether to help Ukraine, but who gets to control the money. Does Europe use it as leverage, or does the U.S. use it for immediate profit and control?
That's it, exactly. The sources we've read suggest the Trump team is extremely keen to get the billions and to get them quickly, and that's putting pressure on Europe to act fast.
To basically preempt the U.S. from dictating the future of all that money.
Right. Either by seizing the funds themselves or issuing loans to Ukraine that are backed by the assets. Yeah. It's a remarkable example of how a unified alliance can splinter when there's this much financial leverage on the table.
And while these battles are raging in financial capitals, the physical war, of course, continues every single day. We need to ground this in the military reality for a moment.
Absolutely.
So what's the latest snapshot from the ground war?
Well, recent reports show some pretty significant shifts. Russian offensive efforts near Kupiansk, a really critical area in the northeast, have practically completely stopped.
That's a major tactical success for Ukraine.
A huge one for stabilizing that front.
Yeah.
But we are seeing Russian gains elsewhere. They expanded the gray zone to include the eastern part of Seversk, and there are intense battles going on in the urban areas around Pokrovsk-Myrnorad.
So stability in one area lets them shift pressure to another. We also saw reports of a massive coordinated aerial assault on Ukraine.
Massive is the word. Ukraine faced a combined attack with 486 different means of aerial assault. That figure included something like 250 Shaheds, the Iranian-made kamikaze drones.
And how effective was the defense against an attack of that scale?
Ukrainian air forces reported a very high interception rate. They shot down 438 of the UAVs, and they got most of the missiles, including all 3 Iskander-M ballistic missiles. But, the sheer volume means some damage still gets through.
And it did. Kyiv suffered major destruction. Residential buildings damaged, 7 people killed, 20 injured. He was suspended in 7 districts, and Odessa's port and energy infrastructure also got hit.
But Russia suffered a major loss too, a big one. Two of their experimental high-value aircraft, the A-60 and A-100, which are their advanced early warning and control planes, were reportedly destroyed in a strike in Taganrog.
Those are the eyes and ears of their air defense network, right?
Exactly. And losing platforms like that is incredibly rare, and they are very, very difficult to replace.
Okay. From the struggle for sovereignty abroad, we now turn to a major domestic fight to save a democracy, with the monumental jailing of former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro.
This really is a political earthquake in Latin America. Jair Bolsonaro has been ordered to start serving it's a staggering 27-year prison sentence.
He's currently confined to a 12-square-meter room in a police base in Brasilia.
And 27 years, that stems from his conviction for plotting a coup d'etat. The plan was to stop his rival, Lula da Silva, from taking power after the election.
And the sources indicated the plot was incredibly violent. It included a plan to assassinate Lula.
The Supreme Court found him guilty of leading a criminal conspiracy to annihilate Brazilian democracy. And crucially, this isn't just about Bolsonaro. 6 of his key co-conspirators, former defense ministers, the Navy commander, were also ordered to begin sentences from 19 to 26 years.
That sends a powerful message.
It signals a real institutional commitment to the rule of law.
And the drama of his arrest was almost theatrical. He was taken into custody after he tried, and failed, to cut off his electronic ankle tag with a soldering iron.
It's an image that sticks with you, but what's maybe most telling is the public reaction. His supporters are calling it a witch hunt, but the mass protests just haven't happened.
Right.
Experts are noting that public support for him seems to be waning significantly. One study found only 13% of people support him no matter what. For now, it really looks like the Brazilian system held its highest leaders accountable.
Moving now to a global struggle for economic influence. Let's look at Africa, where Europe is trying to push back against decades of aggressive Chinese investment.
This was a huge theme at the recent AU-EU summit in Luanda, Angola. The stakes are immense. Africa has the critical raw materials, rare earths, cobalt, lithium, that Europe desperately needs for its green and digital transitions.
But African leaders are wary of just swapping one dominant power for another. Angola's President Lourenço said, the world isn't just 1 or 2 countries, and they'll work with anyone open to a genuine partnership.
And that's the key. China's Belt and Road Initiative has built massive infrastructure, sure, but it often saddles nations with debt and relies on exporting raw materials cheaply.
So what's the EU's direct answer to that?
It's the Global Gateway Initiative, and the flagship project for this is the Libido Corridor Railway. This isn't just about building tracks, it's about strategic control of mineral flow.
Okay, give us the specifics on the Libido Corridor. Why is it so crucial?
The corridor is designed to provide a critical Atlantic access point for resources coming out of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Zambia. These 2 nations have vast reserves of cobalt and copper.
Right.
So by funding this railway, the EU is creating a supply chain that bypasses the Chinese-controlled ports on the Indian Ocean side. It diversifies the route, and it creates competition.
That shifts the balance of power. But what African stakeholders really want isn't just external financing for another railway.
Exactly. They're emphasizing that future cooperation has to be about exchanging knowledge and skills to transform their local economies. The goal has to be to break that old cycle of shipping raw materials out cheaply just to buy back expensive processed goods.
Okay, let's wrap up with 2 quick updates outside of the main geopolitical drama. First up, nuclear watch.
The head of the IAEA, Rafael Grossi, is pushing to restore full cooperation and inspections with Iran. This comes after a resolution urging Iran to report on its enriched uranium stocks and the status of facilities that were recently bombed. The international community really wants to get reliable, verified data again.
And on the science front, a fascinating look into the future of space travel. NASA's CHAPEA Mission 2 is underway.
Yes, 4 research volunteers have now sealed themselves off for 378 days in a 3D-printed habitat that completely simulates a Mars mission.
This is a long time.
It is, and the data they get is vital for understanding human health and performance under extreme stress. Isolation, confined space, and those infamous 22-minute communication delays with Earth. It's the ultimate test run.
We have synthesized a massive amount of information today. From the stunning allegations of mercenary recruitment in South Africa to the intense financial fight over Russian assets and the massive political accountability for Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil.
And what's vital for you to take away from this is how seamlessly these conflicts now operate across so many different domains. You have to be able to distinguish between the promises of diplomatic proposals, like those peace plans, and the cold, hard operational realities.
Like the ground battles and the squabble over who gets to control 180 billion euros.
Exactly.
So, to leave you with a final thought to mull over, consider that struggle over the frozen Russian assets. This is a dispute centered on which Western power, the U.S. or Europe, gets to dictate the fate of those funds. This isn't just a financial disagreement, it's a conflict over alliance leadership. What does this deep internal financial fracture imply about the true solidarity and shared purpose of the NATO and Western alliances when they face the next global challenge?
A question that could define the geopolitical landscape for years to come. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the source material.
We'll catch you next time.